Hello, Story Seekers. I'm Nico,
I'm Ben, and you're listening to the Tiny Bookcase.
or a version of it, at
Yeah,
least.
something like that. Yeah. So we have encountered a technical glitch, quirk, problem, thing, and an enormous chunk of the episode that we were hoping to put out today has been seemingly lost. Um, it's very irritating, as I'm sure everyone listening isn't happy about that either.
Yeah.
But we were keen to still put out some stories today. So this is something of a placeholder episode until we can either fix it completely or get our guest back in. Yeah, that's
There's not
we're
much more we can say, really, is
no,
there?
yeah,
There is a little bit we've managed to recover of our guest for the episode, who was Peter Newman. Uh, we will put that at the end so you can hear about his work, and at some point in the future, keep an eye on our social media because we will put out when we've reinstated, if not lots of episode, at least Peter's story, because it was fantastic and we want you to hear it.
it was very good. It's always difficult whenever you lose anything in a recording. In this instance, losing our chat with Peter was not great because he's a phenomenal person and a really good guest. Um, so yeah, we will definitely try and get his story to you and watch this space. But for now, we do have some stories for you because we wrote for the episode, obviously, and we have that ready to go. In the original recording, I performed first, reading out mine, then Peter read his, and then Nico read his. As you know, we do it. The prompt, which was chosen by Peter Newman, was the handshake. And here's a couple of stories for you. The handshake. The lights were on. It struck him that perhaps they'd been on all this time. The dull plastic strips that marked the edges of the cramped tube held the small points of brightness like diamonds glimmering through rock. Lark was still breathing heavily from the sprint to the hatch. The cutters had been right behind him, and that heavy hatch slamming shut had only partially muffled their hollering screeches. They sounded like they were screaming their threats underwater, and Lark hoped they'd choke on them. It was all he could do to keep his breathing from getting worse, as his imagination betrayed him, and the walls of the access tunnel squeezed his lungs. He couldn't turn around. There wasn't room. Lark could only go forwards. It was why he'd come all this way, wasn't it? With opportunistic cutters looking to end him in every bar and alley from Bucharest to Birmingham. Their obsession with the giants sickened him. Wasn't what their predecessors had already done to the planet enough? They'd condemned themselves to the poison rain and left scars of battles so gigantic that the damage was tectonic. Barren radiation deserts encircled small enclaves sheltering the pitiful remnants of the civilization that had once claimed to be the masters of the earth. Lark, fueled with righteousness, wriggled on his belly through the tube. His breathing, on the cusp of hyperventilation, seemed to expand and compress the metal around him. He could hear their tools now. They were like dogs digging at a rat hole, and they were going to try and cut him out. Lark's face twisted into a snarl as he imagined their rusty circular saws striking sparks off the giant. His giant. This time he was sure it was his. He'd travelled what was left of the world, looking for it. The giants lay scattered across the continents, slipping into the slumber of being geographical features. This final one could have been mistaken for a rubble-strewn mountainside unless someone looked closely. The pilots had, generations ago, returned to Earth from another galaxy. They had brought the knowledge, science, and humanity of a better time back to a planet bereft of hope. They'd shut down their giants for fear of what the crazed and bloodthirsty humanity they had found would do with them, and tried to spread reason once again. One by one, they failed. Organised and crazed cults, fear of scarcity, and tribalism had made it impossible to walk humanity back from the brink of self-destruction. Their children had spawned more children, and the knowledge of worlds other than Earth was mostly lost. Then the Cutters had begun their sanguine search for the descendants of the pilots. Their dogmatic scripture stated that all those with blue eyes were from pilot bloodlines. It couldn't be true, but they didn't seem to care. Lark had blue eyes, which he cursed every day he lived in fear. He wondered how many innocents had lost their hands to the saws of the Cutters over the colour of their eyes. Those giants that the Cutters had managed to penetrate had become ossuaries for stolen hands. The culls had spread like wildfire, fueled by the hope of controlling the giants, and the already simmering misanthropic rage that Lark had felt as a young man boiled over into destructive purpose. Within the giant, Lark's crawl came to a junction. The small pocket of space was a sanctuary from his claustrophobia, and he studied the dusty markings on the wall. Up, that was the way to go. He'd been in a dozen giants, and they all put the pilot's helm up near the top. His fingers left marks on the dusty ladder rungs that his boots then smudged as he climbed upwards. Sweat soaked his shirt, and he knew he was filthy, unwashed, unshaved, and desperation sparkled in his eyes. Lark had been in tight spots with Cutters before, but this time they had him, and the only way to escape was to be correct. He'd grown up with the remnants of the pilot's reason and knowledge. His father, broken by the world, had passed on what he could between binges. Fortunately, that included the access codes to the hatches on the giants. Lark knew what had happened, and knew too that the original pilots had made the mistake of hoping for the hopeless. A sudden dull thunder rumbled through the passage, and Lark's boots squeaked on the sweat-slick rungs. He caught himself before he could tumble the whole way, wrenching his shoulder painfully. The Cutters were trying to blow the hatch. They were getting desperate. Wincing, Lark continued up. After countless rungs and multiple junctions, he finally found himself in an actual room, with space enough to breathe freely. 3 of the 4 walls were covered by inactive instrumentation and dead computer interfaces. The 4th was empty. The metal of it was unmarked, but for a single seam banding across the middle. In the centre of the room was a large articulated chair set next to a bizarre contraption. Twin horizontal cylinders at the top of it emitted light, and complex compartments, frothing with wires, splayed out underneath it like the tentacles of a cyborg jellyfish. Lark darted forwards and half collapsed into the chair. He'd been in rooms like this a dozen times, and instinctively reached forwards to brush a thumb over the pilot's nameplate. It read, CPT, Augustine Clark. He found that he was smiling grimly. Clark and Lark. That was too similar just to be a coincidence. He rubbed his hands together, and then wiped them on his trousers before plunging them into the lit cylinders. Nothing happened for a long moment. He could hear his heart thumping, and his mind began to pivot towards the dread of having to escape the Cutters once again. Biometric handshake complete. The lifeless voice startled him. Commencing system boot. Would you like to conduct a safety diagnostic? No, I need to get out of here right now. I'm in danger. Give me everything. Full return protocol activated. Somewhere within the core of the giant, huge reactor hearts roared to life with enough energy to bridge the gap between stars. Servo motors and ancient joints made from arcane alloys flexed. Out there, Lark knew, the equivalent of an earthquake must be happening as the giant awoke. The instrumentation behind him flared to life, and the lights within the room darkened to a deep blue. Lark felt the full control of the giant's limbs in his hands, and knew he could simply think of it moving, and it would obey. He pushed for it to stand, and as the room rocked about him, he opened the viewing panel. The wall's parts receded to reveal a rising view of the barren landscape through a dusty and damaged viewing window. Below him, the Cutters had scrambled clear, and were racing towards their parked vehicles. He drew up one of its knees and stomped a colossal foot down onto them. Small flames from their exploding vehicles splashed out on either side of it. Lark roared triumphantly and knew he could kill them all. He'd learnt from the first pilot's mistakes. Their decision to hope and strive peacefully to repair the world had failed. Lark would change the world through force. Suddenly, the giant shook violently as its thrusters automatically kicked in. Lark was pulled out of the control points, and pressed down into the seat, unable to move against the forces at play. The air grew thin and the room chilled rapidly. Lark watched through horrified eyes as atmospheric layers peeled away to reveal the darkness of space. The huge burn of the engines held him firmly in place as the giant continued to accelerate. He couldn't say a word, but knew that the giant was no longer spaceworthy. What damage time hadn't done, the cutters had seen to, as they scrabbled to get inside and uncover the secrets, using hands cut from their blue-eyed victims. The sweat on his skin began to freeze, and he felt his eyes bulge as the vacuum conditions set in on his crumpled body. The stars outside blurred into streaks as the interstellar propulsion engaged. Hairline fractures in the viewing window cracked open, and Lark felt the capillaries in his eyes burst as the void of space seemed to set afire with the speed of his travel. Lark's vision tunneled into darkness, and what small movements his heart and lungs had been attempting slowed to a full stop. Course achieved. You will reach your destination in approximately 3 years, said the giant's internal computer. But Lark's corpse could no longer hear anything, as his mind was lost to the abyss of death. His body would serve as a silent warning to those that had left, never to return. So that was my story for this week's episode. Thanks for listening to it. We're going to go straight into listening to Nico's story. To the prompt, The Handshake.
The Handshake. How were we to know? When a call rang out to brace for impact, and I watched half a dozen soldiers sucked into the abyss of space beyond our hull. Their dying words unable to form as the air was stolen then by that starving void. I didn't call out then, because I could not choose whose name took precedence on my lips. When so many friends perish at once, who do you weep for? A strange thing, loss. So heavy and cumbersome. Somehow worse when it's only one, and you have the time to remember their quirks that will from now on go unperformed. No fingers to drum on the table. No whistling. No unique laughter. No beauty nor ugliness. Somehow worse when it's only one. At least when daylight's upon it. I consoled myself with the imminence of death then. It was, it seemed to me at least, an inevitability. Just as certain as the inky blackness beyond the now rent shell of our vessel. We would all be reunited as old atoms in new shapes, and I found some sort of comfort in that. But battle has no time for comfort nor loss. As the automated panel slid across the aperture that had spilled my friends into doom, I did not even stop to check their progress. If they didn't work, then it was death guaranteed for the rest of us anyway. If your maglock and your boots were to lose its charge, if another impact were to send you wheeling, or your firearm were to discharge wildly, that could be you, or others. So no need to watch them slide and lock, as we were promised they would. Brace! The call came again. And how were we to know what lay beyond the outer walls, as the impact wave subsided and a point of light began to work its way around the hull, searing hot, down, then to the side, then up, an unmistakable door to what lay beyond. Nothing more than a name to us then. Cheyenne, we were told they're called. I had no doubt whoever cut that hole was preparing to face human, or whatever name they'd given us, with equal trepidation. And rightly so, it must be said. Those of us who had not flitted into space, or starved, or simply taken their own life through terror at the waiting for this day, gathered at the entrance to watch it birth itself. Every round of ammunition that could be found was loaded and prepared. rounds of phosphorus to burn away anything that dared step foot on Terran ground, even if that Terran ground was hovering in space. We were still relatively new at building spaceships. The first hadn't even had defensive plates. But guns. Guns are an old toy that humans are used to playing with. Here, we would hold the advantage. The light stopped its jagged dance and all was peace. For just a moment. The rectangular metal loosed itself with some assistance from the rear, and two of the more eager soldiers lost their lives. The first, instantly, crushed by the impact, scarcely time for fear. The second we gave swift mercy to. Her cries were primal. There was not time to process truly what had happened. The human mind is fascinating. Its will to keep going when so much of a person is simply removed is incredible. The apex species indeed. Although perhaps not out here, I feared. The Cheyenne that had caused this carnage was a surprise to me. It was, I would say, squat. I'd prepared for something so huge and insurmountable. The voice that had so many times called "Brace!" cried, "Open fire!" And we did. It burned as we put metal slugs and chemical concoctions into it. Called to the noise and the success that it must herald, more came. Their flat faces, slit centrally for one pale orb, regarded us with some unknown emotion. No mouths to smile with, no readable signs to us, the simple human. I'm sure they gazed upon us with equal horror. These soft monsters covered in orifices. The fight that ensued was grim and wretched. The rifles began to click before too long. Cheyenne moved still and would be at their preferred range now. I had a penknife my father had given me, emblazoned with a Swiss flag, which now felt useless. Didn't need to scale a fish or open a bottle of wine. Where was the sword when one was needed? I beat the first Cheyenne to death with the butt of my rifle. The large ocular sphere burst under the pressure of my blow, and although it had no mouth to scream, I recognised the motions of agony. Once I'd rained a dozen blows, it stopped squirming, and I took up its weapon. So heavy, so ugly, so effective. I fought until there were none left but me. Truthfully, I expected death. I met not enough resistance. My friends had not enough resistance. But how were we to know that even as we fought, generals from either side were gripping five-fingered hand to stubby three-digited claw? A handshake as per our customs, some form of blood ritual as per theirs. How were we to know that peace was the word on the lips of every human? That what I did was an act of murder? Of terrorism? The radio, some will say. It was broadcast all cycles. But as I ran cables from their drive to ours and set a feedback loop that at the slightest bump would trigger an apocalyptic blast, I didn't hear the reports. As I set their ship to drag ours to their home, I knew nothing of peace. As the whiteness enveloped me, and 2 billion alien lives, how was I to know?
Right, Nick, do you want to lead us with the next question? I think that would get us back online.
So, if you could take a book and adapt it into another medium, what book would you choose? Which medium? and why?
Well, that's a brilliant question. I feel sad I don't have a brilliant answer immediately. I mean, beyond the kind of the obvious and trite answer of saying my own into an extremely widespread and expensive medium,
That is
then
definitely an answer you're allowed.
I would
I mean
always
it is, but it feels a bit disingenuous. Maybe I don't know.
You could go full New
It's
Line Cinema and split one of your trilogy into a trilogy of trilogies. So each book is a trilogy of movies.
oh, now you'll end me on a rant about The Hobbit if I'm not careful.
Oh, okay.
So one of the things that's tricky to be fair, I would love to see a graphic novel version of The Vagrant, just because I think it would translate very well, and that's certainly something that I would just love to see.
Any particular artist or art style?
I don't know. I don't know. I think. Sorry, one of the reasons I'm being hesitant on this question is there was saw Robin Hobb once talking, and she was talking about, people often ask her, do you want to have your books turned into films? And her answer was no, because I've written them as books, and that's what they are,
Yeah.
And there's something in me that respects that answer about things. People often will say, oh, wouldn't it be nice if Netflix picked this up, or wouldn't it be nice if this got turned into a movie? And of course, it would be lovely, but I also think there's a merit in the thing of itself.
Just as an aside, I absolutely adore Robin Hobb, and I've had a conversation with her about coming on the podcast, which unfortunately won't happen. But she said something very similar about how there's a certain sanctity about the way that she's written the stories. And that she wants them to be, them to be taken in exactly how they are. So reading them out or playing around with them isn't what she wants to give her readers, which is a very respectable stance. I think she appears to be an absolutely lovely person. So
yeah, she's great, and I'm a massive fan of her novels as well. And I think there's something about. So what's interesting for me is that in a lot of her novels, although there are moments of extreme kind of action and pace, often they're very, very slow paced, and that for a lot of writers, I think, or I imagine if I was reading those books, I would get quite frustrated with that. But because her characterization is so good, and I care about the characters to the degree that I do, effectively they can wash the dishes and I'm still there for that, I'm sorry, I've sort of dodged your question a bit.
It's okay, I helped you.
Yes, thank you for the assist. I appreciate it.
Well, you get to roll at advantage because he is helping you.
Yes. I like the fact that the role-playing references are scaling up
It's becoming a role
as we go on.
I love it. The idea of converting translating one of your own works into a graphic novel, I can imagine that being really a really positive experience when it's done well, to see the entire world getting fleshed out in a way that simply isn't feasible with words on a page.
So I'm in two minds about it, because on the one hand, what I would love to see is, if you like, the artist's conception of a lot of things and those discussions being great. But in the case of that book particularly, there's a lot of really weird demons and creatures in it. But often I don't go into long descriptions. So there are some fantasy authors that are beloved for the fact that they will describe, I don't know, the feast or the curtains in the feast hall or whatever in exacting detail. And I don't tend to do that. I'll tend to provide a few details, say, of a monster, a bit like a join the dots puzzle, right? That if you provide enough dots for the reader, they can then create the rest of the monster on their own. And so one of the reasons that I'm sort of hesitant about flipping into another thing is then you don't need to imagine it anymore because it's in front of you. And I think there's something kind of fun about, I don't know, say in The Vagrant there's a demon called the Uncivil, and and everybody has a different vision of the Uncivil in their head. and I quite like that. I quite like that they have their uncivil, right, rather than
Yeah, I
mine.
totally get that. Yeah, because you do lose some of the horror if as you say, if every little detail is already explained.
But having said all of that, graphic novels are cool, and I'd
They are
quite like to
cool.
have a graphic novel.
Yeah, I mean, so your books have been turned into audiobooks.
That's right, yeah.
Did you experience anything? Did that feel like a change in medium, even though it's still reading out the text? But
I mean, I think it is a change in medium because audiobook narrators are artists and they bring their own. So in the same way that when, say, Nico was reading out his story, a huge element of that for me was the voice that he had and the delivery of that story. So, if I was just reading it on the page, it would be a really different experience, and that the narrator voice in my head would be different to the one that he delivered. And actually, as well, a good audiobook narrator can save a mediocre or a bad writer.
Yes.
Right. In the same way that, in the same way that a great actor can save a bad script, if they can bring their own presence to it. So it is a different thing. It's interesting, something I don't listen to. Like, I've never listened to audiobook versions of my own work.
So it's not something that you would countenance doing.
I mean, well, it's whatever works for other people, but for me, because I have a very set idea in my head of how it is, because I wrote it.
Yeah.
If I hear someone else reading it out, I might be thinking, oh, I wouldn't have read it like that.
So, do you get, for example, when they cast it, did they say, well, this is the voice we're going with, and this is how your characters are going to sound, or do you say no, none of that? I don't want to know.
So not so much in my case. So I did get to listen to different audiobook narrators, and then say, reading other things as a sample, and say, yeah, okay, I'm happy with that. And I was very lucky to have that. And I think it's just different for different, but so sometimes an audiobook narrator might ask you for things like pronunciation guides or other things, and might have queries, but it wasn't like a collaborative, I wasn't working with them in the same way, I guess, with translators.
Yeah.
I'm lucky enough to have my books translated. But actually, I think it was only recently that I met anyone involved in those translations. I met one of the translators at, what was it? It was FantasyCon, I think, last year.
We very nearly went to that, didn't we, Nico? We were strongly considering it. I think we'll be trying to get to the next one.
Yeah, I've been a bit hermit-like for obvious COVID reasons, but also just because I've been a bit of a hermit these last few years, and I'm sort of gently venturing out of my cave again. I think it's EasterCon this weekend.
The idea of going to cons is really exciting for me, especially in the context of this creative endeavor that we've started over the last year or two, and also writing our own books and stuff. But it's the damage done by COVID, in particular, like the lockdowns and stuff. Like, I'm not obviously all the horrible illnesses and deaths and stuff, but like psychologically, as an extrovert, I fully get what you're saying about having to come out of a hermit shell, because I've never really experienced that before, and now I find myself sort of dipping my toe in social waters again in a way that I've never had to do before. So I think we're going to have to start just busting through those walls and getting in and talking to people, and exchanging thoughts on things everyone loves. And
they're wonderful. I do think that the kind of the con community is a beautiful thing, and generally very affirming, and yeah, it's I would definitely say, when you're ready, come along.
Yeah.
And if I'm there, then come say hi.
Definitely. So we've spoken about pretty much, we've gone through the processes and everything like that. But what have you actually got that people can get their hands on and read? Anything coming out soon? I know we spoke about wildcards.
Yeah. So I've got, if you like, existing trilogies out there. So certainly the Vagrant trilogy and the Deathless trilogy. So I feel like I should, if it's all right, I'll just kind of mention kind of what they are, because so the Vagrant trilogy is effectively set in a post demonic apocalypse, or in a far future post demonic apocalypse, and it's a silent man with a baby and a goat trying to get to a place called the Shining City with an object that can effectively save humanity. And
That's Paula. So cool.
then
It's really good, by the way.
Thanks. And then the Deathless trilogy, I haven't got a quick summation except to say that it is sort of like one part Grimm's fairy tales and that idea of, don't leave the path and it's scary if you go in the woods and that kind of idea. And one part immortals who reincarnate into their own descendants, flying around in kind of magic crystal power armor. So it's,
boring stuff then. Nothing.
No, it's great. It's great. I love it.
Nothing cool or metal as far.
I just don't have. There's some authors are really good, I think, at summarizing or kind of selling their own stuff. But yeah, if you like fantasy that's a little bit weird and has worlds that are really quite different, secondary worlds, then probably you'll like it. And yeah, the wildcard stuff is all great, and not just. I mean, I'm like I'm one instrument in a massive orchestra.
Sure.
In that, but do check it out. It's pretty cool stuff. If you're UK based, then maybe go to something like Knaves over Kings, over Queens even. And if you're US based, well, the world's your oyster.
The world's your oyster. I think that you did very well at selling your work there.
Thank you.
Put yourself down a little bit there, but I was.
I'm British.
Of course, yeah. I know the feeling, but it sounds tremendous, and I know Nico is a big fan. So I think everyone listening should definitely check it out, and we'll be sure to share some links out as well.
Oh, thank you.
Before us three Brits vanish off and cause a power surge as we all put our kettles on at once. If people do like the weird and they want to find you online so that they can tell you that they enjoyed your books, where can people find you?
So these days, the place that I am, although I've been very quiet on there, but I lurk and watch, if you like, in a slightly sinister manner, is Twitter. And I'm Run Pete Write on Twitter. That's right as in writing as opposed to correct. I wouldn't presume to be correct online. But yeah, Run Pete Write on Twitter is a place to find me if you want to say hi there. And again, if you're at a convention one day and you know that I'm there, feel free to come and say hello and say, "Oh, I heard you on that podcast with Ben and Nico," and then that'll be your icebreaker, and we'll be in.
You're also a very active TikTok dancer, I've come to understand. So keep an eye out for those, gang.
Wait, are you serious?
No.
No, that's a joke. That's a joke.
That went straight over my head.
It's because I did it as deadpan as I could.
Yeah.
You totally got me.
Although that would have been the best. I now wish I was a famous TikTok dancer.
I think the only
thing extremely lucrative.
Yeah, I mean, out of embarrassment of his deadpan delivery, you're going to have to become it now, Peter. That's it.
This is it. The pressure's on.
The pressure's on. Yeah. Wonderful. I've had a fucking phenomenal time talking to you, Peter. I've really gotten on with how you think about stories and talk about your work and your writing process.
Thank you. It's
been really a very positive experience for me. I feel like I've learned a lot as well, which is awesome.
Well, it's nice to be educational as well as fun.
Yeah.
It's been great, to be honest, guys. And I think there is something really fun about coming and sharing stories together, and also weirdly, I mean, it's been very relaxed, but actually weirdly high pressure, right? About when you're writing a story, it's like, well, put your money where your mouth is, and show us what you got. So yeah, it's very bold of you, I think, to have chosen this format.
We are, if nothing else, bold. So,
yes.
Thank you very much. But we hope to talk to you again, and really thanks for coming along, and I hope everyone enjoyed listening.
We will see you across a DM board sometime.
Oh, definitely. That would be dank. Yeah. Thanks for joining us for this episode of The Tiny Bookcase.
Remember to subscribe, otherwise you're going to miss out on the future fun.
Also, tell a friend. If you like this episode, link them to it.
We'd be tremendously grateful. You can follow us on Twitter at BookcaseTiny, Facebook at The Tiny Bookcase, and Instagram at BookcaseTiny for updates. Speaking of supporting the podcast, well, magic can only take one so far. The Tiny Bookcase is supported by the generosity of its patrons. Those kind souls have really kept my belly full the last year. Let's cast a spell for them, shall we? For magnificent beardery, let's cast the Chinicus folliculale spell on Gary Laird. For rich ginger tones on the scalp, let us cast the Orangi Hedondo spell for Scott Byrne. And for general fabulousness, why not the Ooh La La How's Your Mother spell on Matthew McLaren?
How do you come up with that shit, man?